Chapter 366. Before Mr. Jamerson on the other end of the phone could speak, Sydney hung up. Then, folding her arms, she declared, "Once I buy this industrial zone, the first thing I'll do is fire you." The old man appeared to be in his 60s or 72nd, and she saw no need for a man of his age to be a security guard. The security guard flicked away some ash from his cigarette, dismissively replying, "I'd rather go home and enjoy my retirement anyway." Around 10 minutes later, a portly, balding man rushed out. Upon seeing him, the security guard promptly stood up and greeted, "Hello, boss." Mr. Jamerson nodded with a smile, and then, with a fawning look, turned to Sydney. "My dear, I've been waiting so long for you." Due to financial difficulties, he was in desperate need of funds. During their previous discussion, Sydney had mentioned she would think it over. He assumed that she might have found his asking price too high and was considering reducing it. Yet to his surprise, Sydney had called today to confirm the purchase and even opted for a full payment. With 100 million, all his problems would be solved. "Mr. Jamerson, your security isn't very efficient. Just to save some money, did you really need to hire an elderly gentleman to guard the entrance?" Sydney crossed her arms and glanced at the old man with disdain. The security guard seemed agitated. "What's wrong with being old? Am I taking anything from you? Don't underestimate the elderly. I doubt even your grandfather can handle the responsibilities of this job at my age." Sydney smiled faintly. "My grandfather's worth over 60 billion. Do you think he'd need to work as a security guard?" Mr. Jamerson interjected, chuckling awkwardly. "Miss Zell, this elderly gentleman is the father of Jupiter, the head of Johnford Inspection Office, and just a decade ago, he was also the president of the Johnford Martial Arts Association." Upon hearing Mr. Jamerson's praises, Mr. Holt smirked proudly. Mr. Jamerson continued, "The Long Lake Industrial Zone is rather remote and often attracts riff-raffs looking to extort protection money. None of them are a match for Mr. Holt. In other words, he's worth 20 regular guards." Leaning closer, he whispered, "And the most important part, he's cheap. A monthly salary of just $2,800. Where else can you find such a guard?" Sydney raised an eyebrow, her previously haughty demeanor instantly dissipating as she flashed a sweet smile. "Sir, I spoke too harshly just now. I apologize for my earlier comments." Mr. Holt was a former president of the Martial Arts Association, indicating he was at least at a master level in martial arts. The masters her grandfather hired had annual salaries starting at $1 million. She realized she had overlooked a treasure. Mr. Holt snorted. "Mr. Jamerson previously struggled with business, and I didn't press him for a higher salary. If you buy this zone, I'll need at least 3,500. Sydney showed her cute little canine teeth and cheerfully responded, "I'll offer you a monthly salary of 10,000. 10 grand to hire a master in martial arts was a steal. I said 3,500. And that's it. Not a penny more." He turned and went back to his security booth to continue smoking. Sydney looked bewildered. Was it possible for someone to think they were being offered too much money in this time and age? Led by Mr. Jamerson, Nash and the others easily entered the Long Lake Industrial Zone. After Nash explained their intentions, Mr. Jamerson sent a message in his boss's group chat for the industrial zone. Shortly after, the owner of a textile factory brought Yasmin to them. Nash and Zeno located an empty conference room. While Zeno stood guard outside, Nash led Yasmin inside the room. Chapter 367. "Do you know someone here?" Yasmin asked with a hint of nervousness in her voice. "One of my friends just bought this industrial zone," Nash replied with a smile. "Must be rich," Yasmin remarked in awe. "Thank you for helping me yesterday. Do let me know your bank account number, and I'll return the money to you." "There's no need. It was just a small amount." Yasmin waved her hands dismissively. She then inquired, "You didn't come here just to repay me, did you?" "No. I came to ask about the hieroglyphs on your arm," Nash explained with a smile. "Have you seen these hieroglyphs before?" Yasmin stared intently at Nash. "Yes, I have," Nash answered, but he did not elaborate further. "Do you know the origin of these hieroglyphs?" Yasmin continued her questioning. "I don't. I'm also looking for someone to study these hieroglyphs, Nash said, leaning back in his chair. Squinting his eyes, he asked, when your grandfather was young, was he in the Young Family Village? Hearing the name Young Family Village, a subtle change flickered in Yasmin's eyes. She shook her head. No. My grandfather managed a scrapyard, and he never left it. Nash sensed Yasmin was lying. Her grandfather was most likely associated with the Youngs. Yet, he could not determine if her grandfather was a betrayer or a trusted member of the Youngs. The fire might have destroyed the entire village, but it could not be ruled out that there might be loyal members who simply did not return to the village in time. If Yasmin's grandfather was the one who betrayed the Youngs, he should have prospered after leaving the village. His descendants would not be so destitute that they would work as general workers in factories. Given the circumstances, Nash concluded that Yasmin's grandfather was a loyal member of the Youngs. Pondering this, he slowly said, I'm a direct descendant of the Youngs, and the hieroglyphs on your arm must have originated from our lineage. Yasmin suddenly looked up, her eyes locking onto Nash's. Her grandfather had told her about the Youngs and warned her not to reveal the information about the Youngs easily, or she would face deadly consequences. The Youngs no longer existed. She was uncertain whether to trust the man before her. Have you seen this ring before? Nash lifted his right hand, revealing a dragon-engraved ring. Her gaze locked onto the ring, and she nodded. I've seen it before. My grandfather drew it. He said it was the insignia of the successive chieftains of the Youngs. After saying this, her eyes brightened. You really are from the Youngs? Nash gently nodded. Now, can you tell me about your grandfather? Can I call my brother over? Yasmin asked hesitantly. Nash nodded with a smile. Call him over. Yasmin stood up and walked out. She went to the textile factory, located her brother by a lathe, and informed him of Nash's identity. The burly man furrowed his eyebrows. You're not a kid anymore. Do you still believe just about everything people say? Yasmin replied anxiously. But he has the dragon ring that grandfather drew. It's the emblem of the Youngs chieftains. The burly man thoughtfully threw a piece of fabric onto the table. Take me to see it then. Grandpa had mentioned if they were able to locate one of the Youngs, their future would be set. They both made their way to the conference room where Nash was. Upon entering, the burly man immediately recognized Zeno and exclaimed in shock, Aren't you, Mr. Hun? Chapter 368. Zeno cleared his throat, remarking nonchalantly, I didn't expect someone in this remote place to recognize me. The burly man responded with a fawning smile. Mr. Hun, 3 years ago, I wanted to join your crew, but you turned me down. Zeno raised an eyebrow. Oh, is that so? If you're still interested, come find me later. I'll set you up with a position as a gang leader. Thank you, Mr. Hun. Thank you. The burly man bowed gratefully. Yasmin, standing behind, had heard about Mr. Hun from her brother. He was one of the top 4 underground kingpins in Johnford. With a calm expression, Zeno stated, Take a seat. When Mr. Nash asks you questions, you must answer honestly. Mr. Nash. Even Mr. Hun addressed this man as Mr. Nash. Was he the top figure in Dragon Tiger Gate? The burly man remembered nearly confronting Nash the day before, and now he had his doubts. After seeing the ring on Nash's hand, he started to believe that this man was indeed one of the Youngs. Perhaps only someone from the Youngs would have the power to make someone like Mr. Hun willingly serve them, right? Mr. Nash, my name is Derek Judd. You can call me Derek. Derek introduced himself, feeling a bit awkward. Derek, that's quite the name, Nash remarked, holding back a chuckle. Tell me about your grandfather, he calmly urged. My grandfather's name was Caleb Judd. My father married into his family, so both my sister and I took our mother's surname. 23 years ago, right before my mother gave birth, my grandfather returned home early. Not long after my sister, Yasmin, was born, the Young family village suffered a massive fire. My grandfather became gravely ill around that time. To make matters worse, our father developed a gambling addiction and lost everything. Since our mother had to take care of us and our grandfather, we lived off scavenging, Most of the money we earned went to buying medicine for our grandfather. When he finally recovered, he became mentally unstable and often rambled. One day, while our mother was out, our grandfather used pigeon blood to tattoo characters on both of us. When our mother returned and saw this, she had a huge argument with him. After that, he never spoke again. Later, our mother revealed our grandfather's identity. He used to be a servant for the Youngs, but the tattoos he gave us remained a mystery to our mother. Derek shared a lot about his grandfather, but there were still not any clues about the hieroglyphs. Did your grandfather leave you anything else? Nash asked, hoping to learn about the missing map pieces. No, he only left us these hieroglyphs, Derek answered. Nash felt disappointed. Up until now, he had only found 3 pieces of the map. One of them was still indecipherable. Finding the remaining 5 pieces seemed nearly impossible. Actually, my grandfather once gave me a piece of sheepskin with some lines on it. It looked like a map. Yasmin, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. When did this happen? Why didn't I know about it? Derek looked at his sister in surprise. It was the day I received my college acceptance letter, Yasmin recalled. Nash and Zeno exchanged glances, their faces breaking into broad smiles. Suddenly, the doorbell rang from outside, followed by a loud voice. Derek, I'm about to ship the goods. What are you still doing here? Derek's expression changed. I'll have to finish packing that batch first. Yasmin, you stay here with them. Zeno frowned. Why don't you come work for me from now on? But first, take us to the map. Even if Zeno did not take in the descendant of the Young's loyal servant, Nash surely would. Derek was overjoyed. All right. Let's leave right now. He was tired of his monotonous job and believed that with Mr. Hun, his future would be bright. Finish what you started first. Complete the work at hand, Nash calmly instructed. Derek replied with an embarrassed smile. All right, Mr. Nash. I'll get right to it. Chapter 369. After speaking, Derek quickly took Yasmin and left the conference room. Mr. Nash, how do you plan to accommodate them both? Let Derek join your crew. And as for Yasmin, Nash began, but he was interrupted by Sydney's voice from outside. Why keep those machines after the boss ran off? We don't have resources in the pharmaceutical field. Keeping those devices will just take up space. Ms. L, you make a good point. Handle it as you see fit. Mr. Jamerson chimed in, nodding obsequiously. The industrial zone belonged to her now. It was her call on how to manage the vacant factories. Pharmaceuticals? A grin formed on Nash's lips. His master had taught him unparalleled medical techniques, including the art of alchemy. Although he was not skilled enough to create elixirs, he could dilute them into consumable liquids. He had initially planned to have Yasmin work at Baroque, but now he had a different idea. The door was still ajar from when Derek and Yasmin left. Nash looked at Sydney outside the door and called out, Miss Sell, do you have a moment to chat? Sydney paused, pleasantly surprised. She had been trying to think of an excuse to talk to Nash. And now, he had taken the initiative. Of course, she replied with a cheerful smile and walked into the conference room, taking a seat opposite Nash. Queenie followed closely, sitting beside Sydney. I overheard you mentioning some pharmaceutical equipment, Nash said with a smile on his face. There's a pharmaceutical factory that couldn't pay its rent for 3 years due to poor profitability. The owner abandoned a bunch of junk and ran off with his mistress. His wife, Despair, hung herself in the factory. The place hasn't been rented out for a long time. I'm now planning to sell off the junk and renovate the building. I'll cover the unpaid rent. Additionally, I'll lease it for 10 more years. Let me take over the pharmaceutical factory, Nash proposed. You want to take over a pharmaceutical factory? Why bother? Running Baroque seems much easier. Sydney was skeptical. No worries. Just have the factory renovated as soon as possible. You don't need to worry about the rest. I want a stake in it, Queenie exclaimed, raising her hand. I trust Nash. Sydney chuckled. Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you if you end up losing money. Zeno asked, Mr. Nash, can I invest too? Nash nodded. If you're not afraid of losses, feel free to invest. Zeno laughed. In business, there's no surefire win. If you're afraid of losing, then business isn't for you. We'll have Yasmin take charge here, since you and Queenie want a stake. Assist her in getting the company running. And what will you do? Queenie inquired, puzzled. I'll provide the drug formulas. Nash grinned. The success of a pharmaceutical company largely depended on the efficacy of its products. Nash believed he could produce some potent medicines. Sydney, realizing Nash would provide unique formulas, began to regret her initial skepticism. Nash had great medical skills. He must have some folk remedies in hand. Many pharmaceutical companies thrived solely based on a single formula. With his vision, capabilities, and drive, Nash's venture was bound to be profitable. Sydney pressed her lips together. I want a stake too. The four quickly came to an agreement. They decided on an initial investment of $10 million. Nash contributed $5.5 million for Yasmin, while Sydney, Queenie, and Zeno each pitched in $1.5 million. Although the company had not launched or even started operations, shares were already divided according to their investments. At noon, Sydney took Nash and the others to Cloud Peak Palace Hotel for a meal, where they discussed the pharmaceutical company. Learning that Nash invested over $5 million to help her start a company, Yasmin felt deeply touched. Her grandfather's prophecy was coming true. The Youngs were indeed their family's key to prosperity. After their meal, Derek and Yasmin took Nash to their home to retrieve the fragment of the map. Chapter 370. After about a 45-minute drive, they arrived at the slum where Derek and Yasmin lived. Outside, a woman in her 50s was busy processing newly collected waste at a scrap collection center. Zeno did not stop the car. In fact, when they reached the entrance of the housing complex, he even sped up. Mr. Hunt, we're already here. Derek could not help but remind him. Yasmin looked equally puzzled. Nash, sitting in the passenger seat, glanced in the rearview mirror and calmly said, We're being followed. The siblings looked back, and their expressions immediately changed. Concerned, Yasmin asked, Derek, did you offend someone again? Derek responded sternly, I work in the factory every day and rarely go out. Who could I have offended? Enough. Stop arguing. You two stay here. Mr. Nash and I will handle those guys. Zeno said with furrowed brows. The siblings immediately fell silent. When the car reached a deserted stretch of road, it stopped. 3 vans from behind quickly surrounded them, and a tattooed man wearing a black vest stepped out. From the vans, over 30 men emerged. Zeno stepped out with a cold face. Who are you? Why are you following us? The tattooed men glanced at Zeno. Mr. Hun, this has nothing to do with you. Stay out of it. The henchmen around appeared wary of Zeno. They were obviously a little afraid of him. Zeno smirked. The people in the car are my friends. None of you can touch them. The people in the car? The tattooed men seemed puzzled and then pointed at Nash. We're here for him. Nash touched his nose, smiling. And who sent you? The tattooed man, growing impatient, waved his hand. Attack. A reward of 500,000 for each cut. If he dies, I'll take the blame. The lure of 500,000 was too tempting for the ruffians. They drew their knives and rushed forward without another word. In a swift move, Nash knocked down the front 5 attackers like an ancient beast breaking through a cage. Within 30 seconds, all 30 were on the ground. The tattooed man that had a cigarette dangling from his lips was stunned. Nash slowly approached him and asked calmly, Tell me who sent you. If they were from the bigger families or his enemies, they would have sent high-level warriors. He surmised that whoever sent these ordinary men was not familiar with his capabilities. It was Miss Graham. The tattooed man stammered, still in shock from the swift defeat of his crew. There were over 30 of them. Nash finished them off before he could finish a cigarette. Miss Graham. I don't know a Miss Graham. Nash frowned. He could not recall himself offending any lady. Queenie Graham. She works at Universal Group. Oh, her. You all can leave now. Nash realized who it was. He recalled meeting a Mr. Long and a Miss Graham at Cloud Peak Palace Hotel. That Miss Graham must have been Queenie Graham. Hence, Nash returned to the car. Zeno turned the car around and headed back to the slurs. Mr. Nash, you're incredible, Derek exclaimed, still exhilarated by the swift battle. He was about to help, but before he could even open the car door, Nash had taken care of the situation, as expected of the young's descendant. Yasmin looked at Nash with a different glint in her eyes. However, she remembered Nash seemed to have a girlfriend.